What am I talking about? What were we talking about? That's it. So I want to talk about seeing ourselves in others. Because that's such a huge, well, it's an immensely difficult thing to do. I don't know. I just feel like we're taught so much about like what behavior is good and what behavior is bad, and depending on where we grew up, what our cultural background is, like all those components of our identities, like we're taught what we should or shouldn't be. And when we are trying to be the things that we should be, and we see things in others that we're taught that we shouldn't be, it's like, man, it's so understandable to be like, what's wrong with them? Like, or what's like to have judgment. I guess that's what I'm getting at, to have judgment. And judgment seems to just be an inherent part of being a person too, because we also need to be able to judge whether or not things like from an evolutionary perspective, right? Like survival, we need to be able to judge whether there are threats, whether something's going to be a resource for us. Like that's important that's adaptive, right? Like that's important to be able to do if you want to survive. But the thing that it also breeds is disconnection, I feel like. And I've experienced that in my life where like shit, I used to be a very, very cynical person, and that sort of stuff like still bubbles to the surface sometimes. Like I still have to be very intentional about like not judging others. But it kind of goes back to the perspective that I've talked about before, and the perspective of like, how do I even describe it? I guess like really, it really boils down to seeing ourselves in others. That's the perspective. That like, that could be me. Given a different set of circumstances, that could be me. That entire range of the human experience is open to me. Like it could happen. And I think like for myself, like I've experienced such a wide array. Like I've done many of things that I'm not proud of. I've hurt people. Like I've done many of things that like are not in line with what's important to me. And as I try to live my life in a way that is closer to those values, closer to the things that are important to me, like I think I realized that it could have easily gone in another direction. You know, if I didn't have the experiences that led me to a sort of mindset that works for me in order to get closer to those values. And a big part of what that started with, like, and it seems counterintuitive, but like self-compassion was a huge part of it, because like shit, I'm sure, like I feel like it's a unanimous thing, like, or a pretty universal thing, that we are our own biggest critics. Like maybe like outwardly we tend to judge others more frequently, or at least like like I said, like it appears that way from the outside looking in, but no one hears our thoughts. Like I spent a long time just being like literally just calling myself a piece of shit, like all the time in my head, like, and out loud. Like it was awful. It was just like I was so mean to myself, and it took a lot of like intentional effort to be like, I'm gonna try to change that. It took a lot of faking it till I made it, like, because I think I'd said those things to myself for so long that I believed it. I believed those things. They were so deeply rooted in my day-to-day actions that, like, of course I'm gonna believe that. Like, it's what I've heard like most of my life from me mostly, you know. And that goes, you know, that can go into a lot of different things like childhood experiences, development, and all that. But like, just speaking more closer to the present, like in adulthood, when we do have more of a choice in like how we go about these things, like having compassion for myself was such a huge thing. Like starting to be nicer to myself, starting to like highlight areas where I'm like, you know, this is something that I do like about myself, despite like that deeply rooted feeling of like, man, I'm generally just awful. Like really start examining that. Like, why do I believe that I'm awful? Like, why does that thought even come to my mind? And when I started to examine it, like, it was really based on a bunch of like expectations that I like that I should be this now, but I'm not. I should be this person now. Like this ideal sense of self. Like I should be this now. I have the potential. I have the ability to do this, but it's not there now. And in reality, like the potential may be there, but potential is a fickle thing because it's like it still requires a lot of action, and it's like that shit's hard. It's hard as fuck. And God, I think I spent like a good couple years like faking it till I made it. And then at one point I noticed that like I'm being a little bit nicer to myself. Like when these similar situations where like I wouldn't meet my expectations come up, like I'm more willing to be like, you know, given all these other circumstances, it's kind of understandable that I'm not exactly where I think I should be right in this moment, you know? And I think it took, like, again, it's like it's that contrast. It's that contrast of being like, okay, like, now I'm seeing a difference. Now I'm seeing how my actions can have some implications in my present, you know, like those habits being built up. And that's not to say that they were ever fucking perfect, because they definitely were not. Like, oh, I came back and forth. Like, it was just like I swear it'd be like going a certain period of time being like, all right, I'm going to be really intentional about being nice to myself, and then I would fall back and be like, you're a piece of shit again. Like, and then slowly over time, I think that slowly it's like the self-hate, the self-loathing, and like the just being mean to myself slowly started to like to come up a little bit, or to get to like its grip was loosened a little bit. That's the way I would describe it. And it created more space for me to see like the parts of me that are like, okay, like I do have some good parts. Like I do really care about people. Like I may not be in a place where I can support people in the way that I like at this moment, but like I'm getting there. Like I'm doing the best that I can with what I'm working with now, and giving myself a break, like, you know, and seeing things for the reality of it. Like shit, just learning about psychology was such a huge part of that too, because it gives some like foundation, and like it makes sense why we can't just snap our fingers and change, because it's things that are built up over time, and it's hard. Like, and if we're alive up until this point, our bodies are like, yep, that works. Like, you know, like why would I change anything if I'm still alive at this point? But it's not necessarily working, and seeing the truth of who we are. And I think that was huge. It's just like once I learned to be nicer to myself, it became so much easier to be less judgmental of others. Yeah, it's like the less time I spent judging myself, the easier it became to like, oh, like I'm starting to see how like detrimental it was to my mental health to like judge myself all the time. And I imagine like other people are going through this shit too. Like they're probably feeling this stuff in their own ways too. And the way that I perceive them on the outside is like barely scraping the surface of like the story of like how complicated that human is. And I feel like that's like the root of like seeing ourselves in others, is you first have to discover who you are beyond like all the judgment that we have for ourselves. And I don't know, I don't necessarily like, I don't want any of this to come off like I have answers, you know. I'm basically just like talking about shit that worked for me, and in the hopes that, well, like it's multiple, there's multiple layers to it. It's like, first, I really want to connect with people in some way, and the best way I found to do that is by being vulnerable and talking about my experiences and stuff in an authentic way, as authentic as I can be, and sharing that, and also just learning about myself. So, and I think that this sort of thing, like recording myself and doing all this, sort of checks a lot of those boxes. It allows me to examine myself further, and further develop my sense of authenticity, and then sharing it is a vulnerable thing, because it's shit, like, it's scary, like, oh, it's the fear of judgment, fear of ridicule or rejection, and all those things are definitely very very salient, you know. But I think my hope is that maybe I can learn some more about myself, and then by sharing this, maybe others can look at it and be like, it's, maybe see themselves in what I'm saying, you know, maybe, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I think this is sort of just like a experiment of sorts. I kind of just want to see what happens.